All right. Hello. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for having me. My name is Justin Hunter. I'm the founder of Graphite, which is a decentralized, encrypted, private alternative to Google's G Suite. It's really just a productivity suite with document editing, collaborative real-time editing, file storage, contacts, all the things that you kind of have become familiar with Google's G Suite, except for you own your data. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit more about Graphite here in a minute, but the first thing I want to talk about is how we compete with the incumbents, with the giants like Google. Those of us in the Web 3.0 space, how do we take them on? As the title of my talk suggests here, Graphite is competing with Google. But how do I even do that? I think the natural inclination for those of us building in the Web 3.0 space is to topple these giants, right? And the reason I say that it's natural is because these companies like Google, companies like Facebook, they have violated our trust. They've taken privacy away from us, and the natural feeling is to replace them as soon as possible, to get people back to a place where the web is free, the web is open, the web is private if you want it to be private. But there's a problem with that thinking. Google is gigantic. Facebook is gigantic. Trying to just go and topple a company like Google is nearly impossible. If Graphite was going to do that, Graphite would fail. Graphite would not succeed as an app, as an open source project, as a company. So the thing I want to propose, not just for Graphite, but for all of the projects in the Web 3.0 space, is a concept of shrinking giants. And this concept is pretty simple. Rather than trying to focus on toppling those big companies, we can focus on reducing their impact over time. That is a much less daunting proposition than toppling the giants, right? If we can chip away at the success of these companies, chip away at the market share, then we're much more equipped to take them on, to compete with them. And the way to think about this is not just in terms of software, in terms of business. Shrinking a giant, or a giant in general, can be thought of in anything in your life. Any sort of obstacle, any problem, anything that you're trying to overcome. And to help illustrate this and segue into how Graphite is shrinking Google as a giant is 3 of my personal giants in my life and how I've taken these on, how I've shrunk them rather than toppling them. Those giants are writing, controlling my writing, and coding. So the first up here is writing. I've been a writer my entire life. Every single writer you ever meet will tell you that, but it's true. I can remember the first short story that really stuck with me was from second grade, a beautiful story about Jacques Cousteau and an underwater robotic octopus. That was the thing that really made me feel like I could be a writer. But this became, writing as a whole became a giant because of imposter syndrome, which I think a lot of us feel in most of what we do. With writing, I never truly felt like a writer. And so I was always trying to overcome this giant of feeling like an imposter. If I had tried to just topple that giant, just say, you know what, I'm a writer. I'm a writer right now in second grade. I'm a writer in third grade, whatever I wanted to do, I would have given up. I wouldn't have been able to overcome the giant, and I probably would never have become a writer. So the solution to that was shrinking that giant. Rather than toppling it, I chipped away at it by continuing to learn, continuing to write. As I went into young adulthood and then adulthood, I continued writing. I entered programs to learn how to become a better writer. And it culminated in getting a master's degree in creative writing. But it took all of that time, from the time I was in second grade until the time I was an adult, to really shrink that giant down enough to feel like I could overcome it. I still have imposter syndrome as a writer, but even though I'm published, even though I have been writing with purpose for years now, I still have imposter syndrome, but I've shrunk that giant down enough to have overcome it and be a writer. Which leads me into the next giant on my list, which is controlling my writing. So this has been manifesting for a while now, and it really culminated during that master's program in creative writing. I am a cloud native type of person. I like the convenience of the cloud. I do not like the privacy trade-off. But all of my writing, all of my short stories, my novels, the most important writing to me was stored on Google Docs. And that started bothering me as I was finishing up my graduate program, because Google could lock me out of my account anytime they wanted, right? They could say I violated the terms of service and they were not required to tell me what I did. And I couldn't access any of my writing because I didn't back it up in Microsoft Word. I stopped using Word a long time ago. So the solution here was not to immediately attack this giant. It was to research it, figure out what the solutions might be. And as I researched, I looked for alternatives. That was the first and logical thing to do, right? What alternatives are out there that would allow me to control my writing, prevent me from ever being locked out of that writing? Turns out there weren't any. And so the next step was making the decision to build it myself. I didn't have the skills. I didn't have the training to do this, so I didn't know how I would do it. I didn't know what it would look like, but I knew I was going to do it. And just having that knowledge, making that commitment, shrunk this giant down enough for me to tackle it, right? And so that naturally leads into the third of these giants, which is coding. So from a young age, I've always had a computer. My first computers class, formal computers class, was in 7th grade. And in that class, I learned HTML. That was about all you could learn at that time. And I was blown away. I loved the fact that I could manipulate what was on the screen. I took the source code from Yahoo and created a lovely search engine called Justin with a little exclamation point there and everything. So I was hooked to web technologies, but I wanted to build software. I wanted to build something that people could interact with, not just look at. And so I wanted to learn to code. But I struggled with it. I could never get over that hump of learning to code. And this quite literally took me over 20 years to shrink this giant down to be able to approach it and to be able to build things. But I chipped away at it over time, right? I learned things. I tried to build applications. I built websites. Every single thing I tried and failed at was a lesson that helped me learn along the way. And when I decided I was going to build Graphite, that was the moment at which everything clicked. I had a purpose for actually learning to code, to get over that hump. I also had the background because of all of the failed attempts at learning to code. So a 20-year process of shrinking this giant of learning to code was realized when I started building Graphite. But once Graphite was out there in the world, I didn't really have 3 giants anymore, right? I had a 4th giant. And we talked about it a little bit already. That giant is Google. So Google controls so much of what we do personally, but also in the business world, right? Productivity software is what they build and what they sell. They sell user data, but they sell productivity software to businesses. And Google controls just about everything you do. If you take a step back and think about what you do online, your email, your documents, your file storage, they control all of it. So we really don't have much control on the web, do we? We are giving away our data to these companies that are selling it to others. They're profiting off of our data. And with that comes issues. Google can lock you out of your account, as they did to journalists a couple of summers ago. Might have been a glitch, but those journalists were locked out of their accounts and they could not access sensitive and important documents that they were working on. Companies like Dropbox, who we trust to store our files, they've had data breaches. 68 million usernames and passwords were leaked. Google is tracking children not old enough to give consent for their data to be released. And the most famous whistleblower of all has flat out told us that Dropbox is hostile to our privacy. So when you see all this, every single day, something in the news telling you that your privacy is at risk, it's easy to just give up and give in and say, you know what, I don't care. I just take my data. As long as you give me a convenient app to use, that's fine. I don't have anything to hide. I don't have anything to hide is the biggest fallacy that they have sold us. You may not have anything to hide, and that's fine. I don't have anything to hide. But that does not give them free license to profit off of the things that you do, the data that you create. And even though you might not have anything to hide, the people that you work with might have something to hide. Imagine working with an activist in an authoritarian country where they quite literally do have to hide the things that they do. Now, when you're working with that person and you have companies like Google monitoring your activities, they're also monitoring that person's activities. So it's not just about you, it's about others. And when we stop caring about privacy, we stop caring about basic rights. We stop caring about the foundation of democratic values. And I know this sounds like hyperbole. We're talking about software and I'm making the jump to democratic values, but I think it applies here. I think once you start giving up basic rights like privacy, basic human rights, then it's easier for you to give up other things. And then you give up other things. And suddenly, these companies that already control so much control everything. But the good news is you actually do have so much control. You have so much control, you just have to choose to act on it. Whether you're a builder or a consumer, a developer or a user, you have control. As a developer, you can choose to build software that respects people's rights, respects their privacy. As a user, you can choose to use these applications that have already been built. Applications like Graphite. These applications exist and these solutions to build these applications exist. We just have to make the choice to use them. As an example of some of those solutions to build these new applications in the Web 3.0 world, Graphite is built on Blockstack, which gives users a self-owned identity, meaning that unlike Google, who can lock you out of your account at any time, you get an identity that you can authenticate with and you can never be locked out of. Blockstack also provides a storage solution where users can choose where their data is stored. And this is going to be a common theme about some of these examples that I have. Uport is another example of giving users a self-sovereign identity that they can authenticate into applications with. Solid from Tim Berners-Lee is a solution that allows users to own their data. They have storage hubs where their data is managed across multiple apps. And then remote storage has been around before everyone. They have been for years giving users the option to store data in the storage location of their choice across multiple different applications. The point to this is it doesn't matter what you use to build your solution. Build the solution and then as a user choose to use those solutions. This is what Graphite has done, and I'm going to talk through a couple of the ways that Graphite shrinks giants and specifically shrinks Google as a giant. As I mentioned, Graphite is built on Blockstack, which allows Graphite to decouple the application layer and the storage layer. So when I talk about the application layer, what I'm talking about is the thing that you see on the screen, the thing you interact with. You enter text, you upload files. That's the application layer. All of those interactions create data. And that data is the data layer. Where that data is stored is the data layer. Graphite decouples that by allowing users to choose where their data is stored. Rather than all of those interactions, all of that content that's created being stored in a Graphite server and then a Graphite database, it's stored in user-selected storage hubs, wherever you want. And Graphite simply serves that information up to the user. That's the first thing. The second thing is encryption. Now, you're going to hear with just about every app you use that the communications, the data transfer is end-to-end encrypted. And that's great. Just about every website you go to is end-to-end encrypted with TLS. If you go to a website that says HTTPS, the communication is encrypted with the TLS protocol. What you want is your data encrypted at rest, meaning that when it is sitting there in a database, whether you control that database or that storage hub or not, you want your data encrypted. And some companies will offer that. They'll tell you that your data is encrypted at rest. What I would encourage you to do, though, is check and see, do you own the encryption keys for that data, for that encryption? In most cases, you do not, which means the company owns the encryption keys, which means the company can decrypt your data anytime they want. What's the purpose then, right? With Graphite, Graphite does not own the encryption keys. Each individual user has encryption keys that are used to encrypt their data and decrypt their data. So you as a user are the only one that can access and choose who has access to your content. The third and probably most important thing I want to talk about how Graphite shrinks giants like Google and takes on Google is by serving those who are in need the most. Rather than going after the entire Google market share, which would be insane, right? Rather than going after every user that uses Google and say, come over to Graphite. What we're doing with Graphite is we are going to the people that are already desperate for an alternative to Google, because there are people, there are organizations out there that need a solution that is private, encrypted, secure, and will not share information with others, especially hostile governments. There are NGOs that are facing crackdowns from their governments. There are activists that are risking bodily harm, jail, and death every day. There are groups that are facing fines and harassment from traditionally democratic governments. There are journalists that have to fear for their life to do the work that is so important to the world. And of course, there's aid groups, businesses, other organizations that are being spied on by the American government and surely other governments. So the point to all this is these organizations exist. These organizations need a solution. And the way that Graphite intends to shrink Google as a giant is by serving those organizations first. Serve those people first. And then naturally, the belief here is that other organizations that may not have as immediate need to privacy as these groups do will come over and they'll say, you know what, privacy matters to me. Security matters to me. I'd like to find an alternative. And then the next domino to fall will be general users. General users will realize that their data matters, their privacy matters, and Graphite will have been there all along, serving these people, ready for them to make the decision to come over and start using a more private solution. The Web 3.0 movement to me is all about owning your data. If you own your data, you own the future. If you'd like to learn more about Graphite, you can go to graphitedocs.com. We're on Twitter @GraphiteDocs, and you can email us contact@graphitedocs.com. Thank you very much.